because I just thought that he didn't feel as deeply as I did because he wasn't crying and throwing tantrum and quarreling with everybody. And he was just always calm and cucumber. And he said, my wife thinks of the here and the now, but I think of the yesterday, the today, and the tomorrow. Because I'm thinking, what happens when I get too old to lift up Nathan? What happens if I die before him? What happens if he dies before? So he's gone way ahead that I'm not even thinking about.
Welcome to the Family Dialogues podcast. I am Dr. Taniesha Burke. Raising a child with disabilities tests everything from medical predictions to relentless need to advocate for your child. But what if those trials uncover profound blessings, purpose, unbreakable faith, and a love that defies the odds? Today, Christine Staple-Ebanks shares her raw journey raising Nathan, who had a 50-50 survival prognosis. We will discuss how assertive advocacy opened doors, how connection helped siblings thrive, how faith anchors the storm, and ways marriages can endure stronger. Christine is an author, speaker, advocate, and most importantly, Nathan's proud mom. She's proudly identified as a special needs mama bear and knows firsthand the journey special needs families navigate. When Nathan was diagnosed with cerebral palsy at 9 months old, her world changed forever, thrusting her into a life full of learning, fighting, growing, and loving in deeper ways than she knew possible. Christine has lived in and navigated two distinctively different worlds, raising Nathan in Jamaica, where services and supports are scarce, and the United States, where services are more plentiful, but the system can be incredibly difficult to navigate. What she has learned is this: special needs mamas are powerful resources for each other with stories, strategies, and strength to share. But more than anything, they need each other. Christine, welcome to our podcast.
Thank you, Dr. Burke. I'm very happy to be here today.
Yes, and before we get into the whole interview, I do have to tell our listeners that you have been a mentor to me for many, many years when I started out my my career, and you've given me so many invaluable advice that I still hold dear to my heart today. And I just thought, there's so many work that you have done from Jamaica and now in the United States regarding special needs children that I thought it was so important to have you here to share with our listeners the importance of advocacy regarding ourselves and also our children. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you for the invite, and really congratulations on the great work that you're doing, because the job of parenting, I always say, is one of the most important jobs we'll ever have to do. And children come to us with no instruction manuals. We're expected to figure it out.
Yeah.
And so I am always grateful, thankful when there are people who dedicate their lives to really support us as parents, understand how to navigate this life called parenting.
Yes, thank you so much, Christine. Before we get into the whole meat of the matter regarding advocacy and what we need to do to support our children, in the introduction, I did mention that you have a son, Nathan, who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. Can you give our listeners a background on your journey? You have 4 children. He was the last one. What
My
was it
bambino.
like? Right. Your watch belly, as Jamaicans would say. Um,
Yeah.
but can you give us the background, maybe your anticipation when you were pregnant and then after you gave birth, what was that like? Because I think sometimes listeners who might have friends and family who go through something similar, they don't quite understand the rapid shift from, oh my God, we're having a baby, to there is something wrong.
Yes. And, thank you for mentioning that. And I absolutely love that we're having this conversation within the context of the wider family, because one of the messages I say to parents, especially those raising children with special needs, is that we cannot do it alone. There is an old adage, it takes a village to raise a child. When there is a special needs, the village become wider and larger than you can ever imagine. But yes, as you mentioned, before Nathan was born, I had 3 young children and was living life and thought I was just the most awesome mother. I was president of their school PTA, the fun mother who brings in all of these stuff for their classmates and busy climbing the corporate ladder. And then Nathan came along. And while I was still pregnant at 5 months gestation, I'm having a conversation with the OBGYN, complaining about losing my waistline and my swollen feet and how I cry at work if I wait a minute before eating. And then suddenly he just went quiet. And that's one of the most frightening things that, in my opinion, that can ever happen to you as an expecting mother, because a baby is supposed to symbolize hope and joy. And here you are having a conversation with a doctor who not only just stopped talking to you, but he's scratching his head, not a good sign. And so eventually he told us that the baby had a congenital birth defect, a congenital diaphragmatic hernia. What that is, the diaphragm is a little slip of muscle that separates the chest from the stomach, and the esophagus travels down through that, into the stomach. And there was a breach. And because the fetus is turned upside down in the womb, all of his intestines pushed its way through that cavity, compressed his left lung. So if it wasn't picked up, he would have died at birth because he would not have been able to breathe. And so I'm grateful that it was picked up. But all we got was that there was this diagnosis, it was serious, and that he needed surgery right after birth. We were never told how life-altering, life-threatening that kind of trauma on a newborn could be. And so we lived that raw, because I thought that, yes, he was really sick. He was in the NICU. He was on a ventilator assisted. Actually, he was in the ventilator, so I couldn't touch him for about 21 days. And I thought, after he survived all of that, I thought that this was it. And I remember leaving hospital when he was born, and there was a matron who had worked in the UK for many, many, many years, retired several times over. And she looked at him, she looked at his chart, and she said to me, "This child is going to need a lot of love." At the time, Nathan was, I was told, the second case that survived birth of congenital diaphragmatic hernia in Jamaica in like 20 years. So the experience of working with him was very low, which was a good thing and a bad thing, because a good thing was that it made all of the healthcare, the nurses, the doctor, everybody wanted to work with him, because that kind of experience looks good on your resume. It increased your pay, I'm told. And so there was a scrambling of people wanting to work with him. But as they were working with him, as he was going through, you had one set of doctors who talked to me like I was their peers and talked to me in medical jargon. I didn't know how to say to them, I don't understand, because of the trauma that I was going through. Then you had another set who treated me as if I don't have any value in the conversation and there's nothing that I added. So that was extremely confusing. So I was very silent during those early days and years. But after I took him, early days and months, but after I took him home and I observed that he was not progressing like his siblings, meaning that at 6 months, he couldn't roll over. He couldn't focus on you with his eyes. At 6 months, he still struggled to feed. At 6 months, he was like a brand new baby. He had no concept of the world, no concept of what was going on. And we were taking him regularly to the post-surgery clinic. And I said to the doctor, there is something wrong with his development. And the doctor would listen to me, and then he would ask me a bunch of questions, and then he would give me the chart and say, give it to the nurse outside and let her schedule another visit for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever. And he never addressed the concerns So I started noting them. And when he got around about 7 months, I decided, you know what? I'm going to go somewhere where somebody listens to me. So I discharged him. I know in some systems you can't do that, but in Jamaica, thankfully, I could. So I discharged him from the clinic by never going back and took him to the pediatrician who was seeing his siblings. They decided, I agree with you. At 7 months, he is way below development, except for his height, because he's tall. Everything else was significantly below the development milestone. And so we started tracking for 2 months and running tests. And at 9 months, the neurologist we saw diagnosed him with cerebral palsy. So it was quite a journey up to that point in itself.
I was thinking, is it usual for a diagnosis to take that long at 9 months?
Actually, yes. Yes. Things have changed somewhat since Nathan, because Nathan is now 21. But at the time, the diagnosis for developmental disability in Jamaica never usually happen until the child is about 2, pushing into 3. Because there are some delays, and because of the trauma that he had been through birth, there are some delays that would not necessarily lead to a disability. And so it is expected. And so what the healthcare practitioner is supposed to do is to track and watch. But his delays were so significant that even as his mother, his body, for instance, I'm holding him at 6 months, he feels just loose, like a noodle in my hands, like he's going to fall out. His body wasn't engaging. If you have him and you put him down and he's about to fall, not that he did, his body never responded. And so it was just something more. So at the time when he was diagnosed at 9 months old, he was one of the first children in Jamaica to have been diagnosed that early, because I have a nephew with autism and he was diagnosed at 3 years old. And so it is not common for them to be diagnosed that early. Hopefully, things have changed somewhat, but at the time, no, it was not ordinary for them to diagnose so early.
Looking back, your intuition was there that something is wrong. For listeners who might have young babies, newborns, and they're having that kind of intuitive sense that something is off, what advice would you give them that you wish someone had given you back then?
Yes, that's a great question, because back then there was not a lot of information that was available to me. And that was the most frightening part, because here you have this major diagnosis. You don't know what it means. You don't even know what you're seeing. You just know that you are seeing some things that are not typical. For some parents who is their first child, they might not notice it. But for others who are more experienced parents, they will notice. And my advice to parents is always follow your gut. But more than your gut, you got to begin to document what you're seeing. So you might not hold the language. And with today, with the internet being as readily available as it is, we can search up. And as with AI through Google and all that, you can say, I noticed that my 4 months old is doing so and so. What could this mean? And it gives you information. What should I be looking for? So that when you go to your doctor, you are having that kind of conversation rather than saying, I think there's something wrong with his development because he's not this and he's not that. And the doctor would say to me, that's typical for that age. But if I had understood the developmental language, then I would have been able to speak in a different way, because I find that they pay attention because that information enters into the child's record. And so they pay attention with what they're doing if they recognize that you're an informed parent, as opposed to if you're not informed. The second point that I want to raise with that is, as parents, we aren't trained in developmental science. We're not trained in healthcare science. We just have our baby and that's it. So we are looking to those professionals to guide us. But one of the things, they can't guide us. if we are not giving them information. Because while they're expert in their area of study, their area of work, we are the experts in our children. So we need to bring our voices to the table because we're an equal partner. And so a significant way that we do that, we begin to document what we see so that when we're having those conversations, we can say, well, developmentally, he is 6 months old. And at this point, he should be able to sit up with support, but he's not sitting up. When I put him to sit, I notice he falls forward or he falls to the side, even when I prop him up. Is that normal? And is it something I should be concerned about? So we begin to have those kinds of more informed conversation earlier. And when I was able to do that with the pediatrician who saw him, he would say to me, okay, let's put a game plan together. So for the next, we're going to see him once a month instead of, the usual wellness chart that they have. So we're going to be looking for these 3 things. So in looking for these 3 things, this is what I want you to document. And then when we come back, we'll discuss it. So it became more of a partnership in getting to that kind of solution, because at the end of the day, for them to arrive at a diagnosis or even a prognosis, it is actually it's an exploration. It is them trying to track and to see what's happening to compare it with a norm. And so it's important for us to be very au fait with what's happening with our children, to document it and to have those conversations.
Quick break for listeners tuning in. I have a question for you. Are you a subscriber to this podcast? If this conversation is resonating with you, please hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Drop a 5-star rating and leave a quick comment. It really helps other families find us and keep these conversations growing. If you want to continue the conversation, you can Facebook or Instagram at Dr. Taniesha Burke. Thank you so much. Let's jump back into it. Yeah, I think it's so important, yes, to document it, because I was just thinking so many doctors might think, there you go, another anxious mom, especially if you're a first-time mom.
Yes.
They don't really know what's going on and they're making a big deal out of it. But if you have your diary to say, I've been tracking for the past 3-4 weeks, is this pattern normal?
Yes.
More likely to engage in a deeper conversation with you instead of writing you off as another anxious mom. But then also it's to realize too that they're only seeing your child for a limited number of times, or in each visit, maybe 20, 30 minutes. And that is not enough time for them to sometimes pick up the subtle things that are not correct or not in line with the developmental stage that your child is on. So it's really good to document everything. I want to take a step a little bit back before the birth, because you had 3 children. And what was that conversation like with your children that something is wrong with their sibling? And how do you support them with that?
We just finished or still are working through that trauma. I started off by saying, I'm glad that you're bringing this conversation into the conversation about the family, because a disability impacts every member of the family. But at the time, we were struggling with what was happening, meaning myself and Robert, my husband. We were struggling with what was happening. We were living in the here to now. We were living with the fear of what something being wrong with the development of the child meant. But we didn't understand it enough to have that conversation with the kids. We never did. How do you tell? The oldest was 7 at the time, 7, 6, and 5. How do you have that kind of conversation when you yourself don't even begin to understand what it means? And we never had that conversation. And after he was born, we knew that they were so vested in the pregnancy. And we had bought them a 3D baby book, which they look at showing the stage of development. And they were in that book every day. And every time strangers came to the house or anybody came to the house, they would say, we are having a baby. And then they would open the book and tell them the baby is now 6 months old. And this is what So they were very vested in this baby. So when I went in to have the baby, and I was going in and out of labor as well for about the last 3 months of the pregnancy. So when I eventually went in to have the baby, and then he was whisked away from me at birth, I never saw him, didn't touch him, knew nothing, I didn't even know if he survived because he couldn't breathe. So they had to take him, and there was the plan that was in place to incubate him before cutting the umbilical cord fell through. My doctor wasn't there, and so he was born, and then he was rushed down to the NICU unit before I even had a chance to see him. And Robert was there with me until he had to go home and get the children ready, because Nathan was born about 4 a.m. We were at the hospital from midnight. And so he left maybe about 7 o'clock to go home and get the children ready for school and so on. And it is about 5 years ago that I was actually doing a podcast and invited my oldest to have a conversation to share her experience of having a brother with cerebral palsy. And she said that when I went in to have baby, she was so excited. By this time, she was 8. She was so excited. They all were excited. They were waiting up for us. And we just forgot about them. They were with grandma and grandpa. And when daddy came home and he said the baby was sick and wasn't going to come home, she cried herself to sleep. And then she had to console her siblings. And I was still in the hospital, so I didn't know that. So there was no preparation around the family. And that is why, for me, for the last 10, 15 years, I have been focused, even in my graduate studies work, I have been focused on looking at the systems of support that needs to be wrapped around the whole family, from there is an in utero diagnosis straight through until after, because there was a lot of unintended trauma that landed on my older children because we didn't even know we needed to have a conversation with them. And even if we had thought about having a conversation, we wouldn't know where to begin, because how do you explain what you don't know? And as parent, your instinct is to support is to protect your children. And so you're not going to give them information that the time Adrian was 8, Ryan was 6, and George 8, 6, and 4. I'd given that age wrong before. How do you have that conversation with that age about what it means for your brother to be in a hospital when you didn't even know? And so, unfortunately, we didn't do anything to prepare them for the fact that there was something wrong with the development. And then even after he was born and in the hospital, eventually we started talking to them. But by that time, a lot of trauma had been laid.
And what would you, if you could go back in time, how do you think it would be best to support the older siblings?
Yes.
Conversation is one thing, but from your experience over the last 10, 15 years, in addition to the conversation, is there something else that needs to be considered? Maybe other extended family members, the church? What do you think?
Yes. And so I'm glad you asked that, because I just finished my 9th book, The Special Needs Mama Bear Playbook, How to Thrive Beyond a Diagnosis. And what that book has done is to use my life as a blueprint, my life personally, and then my life, because I've been involved in advocacy in Jamaica for 17 years. And it was born out of all of this. And so my life professionally, in terms of the experiences that I've had supporting other parents, and then not just in Jamaica, but in several other countries, including Barbados and St. Lucia and Dominica. And one of the things that I cover in the book, it starts with you. So I talk to parents about helping them to name the emotions that they're experiencing and help them to know, first and foremost, it's okay. It is a normal part of what you're going through. It's trauma. and provide some tools with them in terms of how to work their way through. But then to say to them as well, if you are struggling and having a problem moving past, then you need to get professional help. And in getting the professional help, you need to work with counselors who are experienced supporting families like yours, because not every counselor understand, and the worst thing you want to hear is platitudes about what you need to do when it's not hitting the head on what you need to do. Secondly, in terms of recognizing the impact of the disability on what in human services term we call the ecosystem of the child, which is the internal family, the community, the grandparents, because it affects everybody. And so there is need to have that kind of also professional support in helping the families understand what to expect, because we fear what we don't know, right? And a big part of the fear was just living in a place of just not knowing. So when the children would ask questions, I didn't even know how to answer them because I didn't know. I didn't understand my own thing in terms of how it was presented to me. I thought he was going to die. I thought cerebral palsy was a death sentence, because every time I spoke to the doctors who supported him in the public hospital, she would say to me, if this child survived childhood, if this child survived this child might not survive. So I lived on the fence for a while, not sure if he was going to live or going to die. So how do you have that conversation? So it would have been helpful if there was whether a counselor in the church. A lot of the work that I do, I actually train church leaders in how to understand the needs of special needs families and how to provide that kind of support. But whether there's a counselor in the church, sometimes it is a guidance counselor at your child's school, or a lot of times it is one of the professionals who work with your child, who you are able to say, my children are having a hard time, or I need to have the conversation with my child. Where do I begin? And a lot of times they will give you information, or they may say, oh, bring the children in at the next visit so we can have a conversation with them. And that's what kind of helped my children begin to find their feet, because as I went in search of services, one of the times we're still living in Jamaica and we fundraised and we went to a rehab facility in Florida for 4 months, and it's a family focused therapy. So with all the different therapy intervention he was getting, the whole family was there. And what I loved when the therapists were working with him with his physical, occupational, or speech, it was done through play-based therapy. And so they would say to his siblings, this is how you can support your brother. And your brother can't do this, but when you do this, this will help him. And so that kind of built the capacity of my children, but it also built my capacity to understand how to continue that practice at home.
Yeah. Thank you so much, because I think many parents who might be in similar situation may be so numb that they can't even figure out what to do, or the extended family is just standing there not knowing how to support. So if an extended family member is listening to this podcast, they might then be able to guide the conversation with the parent to say, have you considered this? And maybe I can help you to find a therapist, counselor, to kind of give you more support. I am curious about your husband's reaction, Robert. How did you as a couple manage the initial diagnosis, and then after 9 months, the other diagnosis of cerebral palsy? What impact did that have on your marriage and on you as an individual, now that you're saying, again, I had 3 healthy children, what's happening here? How did you navigate that as yourself and as also as a couple?
So that's an interesting question. When I share about that first prognosis of the congenital diaphragmatic hernia, CDH, Robert was at that OBGYN meeting with me. He just decided he was going with me because this was our fourth child. I was an expert. You don't need to come to an appointment with me. But for some reason, he said, hon, I want to take you to this appointment, because I'd gone to the initial ones. He went to the first one and then I'd gone to the initial ones. And he says, I want to come. I want to see, the ultrasound and see where things are myself. But I don't remember him being there when the doctor So I just felt like somebody just pulled the floor out from under me. And I do not remember him being there. It is in retrospect when I think back, I'm like, but yeah, he drove me there and he drove me home. But I had no memory of him being there. So I immediately went within, which is a normal psychological response to trauma.
Yeah.
And I absolutely forgot. And he was there holding my hand, and I didn't even remember. And after we got home and we reached out to our church community and they prayed with us, I remember he saying to me, "This is our baby, and I don't care what it is. I'm always going to be there for him, and I will always support you." And I think as part of his support, because he was quiet, because he doesn't talk a lot. And so I would talk and I would try to draw things out of him. And he would say, I'm thinking about it. I don't know. But it was the things he did. Like he made sure I had a foot rub every night. There were some things, if they're cravings that I have, he'd make sure that I have them. So there were things he did to show his support. And then after Nathan was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, I was with Nathan alone because we had 3 other children. So this Saturday morning when I was going to the doctor to get the test results, I was saying to him, we don't want to drag all 3 children to the doctor with us. And we couldn't find anybody to watch them. And so he stayed, I went. And when I got the diagnosis, I didn't say anything to him. I called him and I said, I'm on my way with the baby. Can you just come and take his carrier and take him inside? And he came and I went for a drive. And that was the first, that was the first test of my faith. I said, God, I don't know how to have this conversation with him. You're going to have to tell me how. And that's when I began to lean into prayer before I talked, because I sensed that how I spoke was important, because Robert relied on me to have the information, to understand what's happening. He would always tell them, ask her. I'm just a chauffeur. Or just ask her. I'm the one who carry them around. Or I just pay the bill, kind of a thing. And so I didn't know how to have that conversation with him. And so we started with just talking about the diagnosis. And he said the same thing. I'm just going to be there. About 4 years ago or 5 years ago, one of the radio stations in Jamaica, we were still living there at the time, so it's longer, it's about 7 years ago. One of the radio stations in Jamaica invited Robert for an interview for Father's Day. And they were talking about disability and the family. And that was the first time I heard how it impacted my husband, because I just thought that he didn't feel as deeply as I did because he wasn't crying and throwing tantrum and quarreling with everybody. And he was just always calm and cucumber. And he said, my wife thinks of the here and the now, but I think of the yesterday, the today, and the tomorrow, because I'm thinking what happens when I get too old to lift up Nathan? What happens if I die before him? What happens if he dies before? So he's gone way ahead that I'm not even thinking about. So that was when I began to understand that we both were going through the experience and going through it differently. And we never, again, because we never knew how to have a conversation with each other, we kept the conversation very practical and functional. We have doctor's appointment. The results said this. We need to pay for this. We need, and then you have the children with it. We need to get them to school and so on. So there was a while when it put a lot of strain on the marriage, but not from the perspective of not loving each other or not wanting to support each other, but from the perspective of we're both carrying this weight and carrying it differently. And we were both also trying to figure it out because we didn't know we could figure it out together. That took a while to come to us. So since then, I've paid attention to how we share information, how we make sure that our conversations are not just about Nathan, not just about his needs, not just about the children, but how do we schedule time for ourselves? How do we, make sure that as a couple that we are having that kind of time. And it's hard. The first time we had a
Even
date night after that, that was Nathan was 10. And
oh,
we
wow.
tried, but we kept going back to the kids.
Yeah, yeah.
You know?
It's hard. It's hard to get out of that pattern. I am
Mhm.
so happy you shared Robert's experience because I think women we might say he's not emotional enough. He doesn't seem as if he cares.
He don't love him as much as
Right.
I do.
Right. He's not invested. And it could just be that similar to Robert, he is just thinking and strategizing 10 years ahead, and you're in the moment while he's thinking about what to do in the future. So,
Yeah.
others, just to remember that he is not going through the experience just like you. He's going
Right.
through it differently. And so it looks different.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. And that's why in my book as well, I do provide a lot of templates and a lot of conversation starters because a big part of the journey is not never being sure how to start that conversation. Never being sure how to even voice it. How do I voice how I'm feeling when I'm just feeling all of these emotions? I can't even put a name on them. So how do I have a conversation about that? And so our feelings kind of get buried under the everythingness. I call it the everythingness of life. Our feelings kind of get very buried. And as a result, it makes it difficult to have a conversation. I have met over my practice over the last 15 years, I have met more fathers who have stayed while the mothers left. And it's not because they stopped loving each other, it's because one party just couldn't handle it anymore. Because all of a sudden, that closeness that you have with your spouse and your partner, that closeness is like this little person has just wedged their way inside, where everything that consumes you and your conversation is about this little person. And there are a lot of people who just can't handle that because they take it as rejection. They take it, he doesn't love me anymore. And I went through that as well. And it's not just with Nathan. I'd be having a conversation with Robert when the children were younger. And it's something that's deeply, deeply traumatic for me or deeply personal for me. And I'm having a conversation, and one of the kids goes, "Daddy," and he's gone. And I would get so offended because I felt discarded, and I had to understand the heart of a father. I had to do some work in that domain to understand that the protector instinct is going to go to where there is a perceived threat being more than, so he knows I'm okay. And so he just wants to make sure that the kids are okay. And I began to learn how not to take a lot of what he would do personally because I understand it was part and parcel of him trying to manage. But one of the things that we make sure that we do is we would download together. So even for half an hour at nights, sometimes we can't even talk. We just sit together. We might watch something together. But we just really began to put things back in because at the end of the day, when all the other children are gone, and when we live in countries like we do, sometimes the individual with disabilities have the option to go live in a residential facility once they become an adult. So we have to make sure as partners that we are staying current with each other and that we're growing together in spite of the disability. But as I said, a lot of times you aren't even aware because you fall right into some coping and then survival. And when you're in that space, there is no thought about tomorrow, only the next urgent emergency that pops up today.
Yes, I love the fact that you mentioned the time to download. So you might be so busy in the day, but that half an hour at night before you go to bed to really try to connect. Some parents, some mothers, before they have children, and then also if the child has a disability, they were very successful, like yourself, very in the corporate world and all of that. Can you share with our listeners what that did to your image now that you have to be home full time to take care of Nathan. But
Yeah.
before you had your three children, but you were still able to be in the corporate world and, conducting meetings and all of that, leading your team. And now you are exiting the corporate world, not necessarily because you said, I am leaving, but it's a must because of your child, your
Yeah.
child's needs. So, how did you make that transition?
Oh my
A
gosh.
challenge?
Oh
Because
my
maybe
goodness.
some listeners are at that point
Yeah.
now that there's a diagnosis, we need to make a decision. Somebody needs to be
Yeah.
home. Usually,
Yeah. Yeah.
your identity as a corporate person, as a successful
Yeah.
woman,
Yeah.
is now on
Yeah.
pause. How do you deal with that?
So I'm going to back up a little bit because the decision that somebody had to be home, we knew it needed to happen because of the extent of the need, one. Two, as his mother, he was now 2 years old, and I still had no idea what cerebral palsy was. I had no idea what my role was in supporting him. I still felt very lost. And so there was that part of me that felt guilty now every time I went off to work and I was leaving him at home with strangers. And when Nathan was 2, he had a really bad case of pneumonia that I missed because the cerebral palsy masks a lot of things that you'd normally pick up. Because if a child is run up and down and then all of a sudden they're just laying down, then you know something is wrong. He wasn't running up and down. And so there was not a lot of change about him, but there was something in my spirit that said he seemed a little off today. And I went off. I traveled for work internally in Jamaica, and my every time I called home, he was sleeping, and I said, "No, this is unusual." And I came back, cut my trip short, and came back home and took him to the doctor. And I walked in. She said, "I don't like how Nathan look. Take him downstairs. We need to do some X-rays because I need to see if there's anything going off. Because if he has a cold, unless something runs out, you don't know because he doesn't. Because all the muscles that affect every area of life, breathing and so on, they're impacted by cerebral palsy. And so you have to watch them. And I became adept at using a stethoscope to listen to his chest and that kind of thing to see if anything was going. And when we did that check, we found out that he had pneumonia, and so he was hospitalized. She said to me, if you had kept him 1 day later, he would have died because it was the lung that was impacted at birth and it was on the verge of collapsing. So that was my wake up call, that I needed to be home, because if I was home, I would have picked it up. And so we made the decision to quit. Now, here was a clincher. My income was 2/3 of our household income. So it was a huge financial knock. So, as part of the decision, we moved in with Robert's parents because they were living alone, empty nesters, so that we could cut our expenses in many areas to make it work. I went into depression because my corporate, I had from a little girl dream of having this corporate career and all of that. And it was such a significant part of my identity that when I left, I didn't know who I was. Then my friends and all the people that I related with came through the workspace. So when I left, I felt stripped because they moved on and I no longer had those friends. And it was a really, really difficult time for me for several years because I was accustomed to attaching myself to a company. So I would say, this is Christine, you've reached so and so. How can I help you?
Yeah.
So that was gone. So I didn't know who I was. So I had to rebuild my identity. And I'm glad I did because I was so caught up in who I was in my career that I really didn't know who I was in myself. And that's what Nathan taught me, and taking that decision taught me. And I began to explore and develop myself and develop other areas. And eventually I went back into setting up a nonprofit. But now my identity was not tied to the work. My identity was tied to who I am first as a resilient woman, as a woman of faith, as a woman who loves fiercely, as a woman who don't take no for an answer, as a woman who would kick down doors and burn down buildings if I have to fight for my loved ones. So I became strong in who I am. And so in whatever space I step into, that's the woman who shows up. But it was a hard journey and a lot of work. And, thankfully, there are some programs that supported me along the way that helped me to do a lot of self identity work and personal leadership work that got me to a place of understanding that what I do for work is just one of the characteristic of who I am. It's not who I am. And to help me to get to that place.
How did you get out of the depression? Did you go?
I got out of the depression.
Yeah.
Actually, no. So in Jamaica, therapy was not a solution for us. So that was not a place we went. But I got out of depression through my faith. That was the pathway because I had a pastor who I had a relationship with. I would go sit with him in counseling because I was trying to reconcile all that I was going through with my faith so that my faith wasn't external to me. It was internal. And so I had to get to a place of understanding that who I am and everything that I'm going through, it had purpose. And so my faith helped me to anchor in that. And once I began to not see what I was going through as something that was happening to me, but something that was molding me and shaping me to do, it shifted how I felt about what I had gone from. And so I leaned into my faith a lot. I leaned into the Bible. I leaned into the scripture. I leaned into prayer, into helping me to understand just what I'm supposed to do with this.
Yeah.
And so I saw that it was absolutely a flashlight given to me because I became aware of all the other families who were struggling, all the other mothers who were struggling with this issue and had nobody to talk to. So I kind of after a while, became that voice that people talk to. I became that voice that would help other people. So my pain gave light to the purpose that I live. And that was what helped me to come out of the poor me and why is this happening to me to it is happening to me, but it is for a purpose. So let me use that and channel change.
So in helping others, you end up helping yourself as well.
I ended up helping myself. Yes.
I want to switch the conversation to advocacy. I remembered when, we met when I was fairly young in my early 20s and I was very motivated and I wanted to climb the corporate ladder similar to you. And you said to me, Taniesha, there's a difference between aggressiveness and assertiveness. You need to be assertive, not aggressive. And I'm saying that in relation to advocacy, because you mentioned in one of our conversations before this recording that you went out hardcore with advocacy, with the aggression,
Yeah.
that didn't work. So
Yeah.
for parents who now need to advocate for their children and also for themselves, how do they differentiate? Am I being aggressive? Am I being assertive? And what's the benefit of assertive advocacy?
Yeah, and I'm glad you asked because I actually wrote a book and there's a course on Udemy as well, Lose a Fear, speaking up with confidence for your special needs child. And I also cover that whole section in the book because advocacy, aggression can hurt you. Assertiveness position you. And what I mean by that is when somebody, as parents especially, when somebody, we say in Jamaica, step on your corn, when somebody hurt or somebody say something or they dismiss or they say something that is not nice about your child, it brings up an anger in you and causes you to react. So aggression is a reaction. Something is triggered in you and you react. And when you react, it shuts down critical thinking and you go into fight or flight mode. And when you do that, it's like pouring gasoline on fire often because it gets us nowhere. It creates more stress, more trauma. And especially if it is a system that you're working with where your child has to be there, like the school system or the healthcare system, it leads you into a place of where I got to, where I was called that woman and that mother. And nobody wanted to accept my son for service. And he was 4, because I was a mother who wasn't afraid to push, who wasn't afraid to ask. I was aggressive. And I was aggressive because I just felt that my son was dealt such a raw deal. And I also felt that a lot of the people that we were paying back in Jamaica weren't doing what they're supposed to do. And it was hard to put the money together to get the service. And then you see them not doing what they're supposed to do, and they're taking the money anyway. So I was angry. And so it was quite easy to get me to just flip over to that side of aggression. And it got us nowhere. It just got him locked out of service. It got him where we'd go to school, and people would know about me before I landed there, and they would tell me, no, we have no space for him. So he suffered. So when I actually wrap my head around what is my goal is to help my son and to help him get the attention. My goal is to engage people and enroll them so that they want to help him. So how do I do that? And so that's when I learned that being assertive is having the right information. But instead of attacking, we respond. Instead of reacting, we respond. So I go in a meeting and they tell me, for instance, we're dealing with his IEP meeting, Individualized Education Plan, which is a requirement in the state, and it's federally protected that there are certain services that a child with special needs must give. And there's some district who put it on paper, but it is not translating in how they're doing the service. So initially, I came guns ablaze. And they smile and they hand you off. We'll think about it. And think about it really mean we've already decided. And so that's it. And they would drag out a process. It gets to the end of the school year, and then, nothing changed. So I had to change a tactic. So I enter into conversations and I carry the information and say, okay, so I've observed that this and this and this is happening. And I know that you're doing that, but it's not working. Is there something else we can look at? So you're now being assertive in terms of you're not letting it go, but you're engaging them. And I found when I did that, people were saying, we were noticing it, and the teachers were saying the same thing. Let us look at so and so. So I found that it made such a difference in how we access, because at the end of the day, a lot of people really want to help, but perhaps however they're helping is what they know. And so I began to see it as my opportunity to teach them. So when I got to that place of just stepping in that place of being assertive, I found when I went to the meetings, after the first year when I went to the meetings, everybody came with pen and paper because they were learning. Because I was saying, I was reading this, or I was working with another family and this happened, and do you think we can pull something from the... So it became more of a team approach, and their practice is growing. There is kind of no animosity, no aggression in the space. And so, after a while, people were more willing to work with me than when I come in guns ablaze kicking down the door. And so one of the things that I say to parents in my advocacy workshops is, I know you want to kick down the door and you want to light the building on fire. Write that letter. Say everything you want to say and then burn it. Go and kick a tree. Kick wild bush, kick a football, go to the gym, hit a punching bag, get it out because it can't stay in. Get it out. And then go back and send to yourself, what do I need from this particular engagement? Write it down. And when you go in the meeting, you have that piece of paper, read it if you have to, or you write it down. And it keeps your focus on your child, because if you have a misstep, your child is the one who suffers. And so there is a lot of support for parents to understand some of the skill set of advocacy. A second part of assertiveness is having the facts. So if you live in a country where there are no special education laws or any disability laws that give any rights to your child, like with Jamaica when Nathan was born, I use a United Nations Convention of Rights for Persons with Disabilities because most countries around the world, I think 189 countries, are signatories. And they have to report back to the UN about what it is that they're doing. So when I had conversation with ministers or government, I would always quote what it says that we have agreed to. And in the International Convention for Persons with Disabilities, nothing about us without us. So it opened the doors because they knew that it gave me a legal ground if I wanted to sue, which I thankfully didn't go to. Yeah. And so you equip yourself. If you're living in a country where there are laws in place, you write down the law specific and say, but this law says that he is supposed to be in a least restrictive environment. But this environment is restricting his access to so, and so. So how can we fix that? Can we fix it here or is there another placement? And when you go about it from that standpoint, a lot of the organizations, the schools, they're afraid of litigations. And so, they will be more willing to work with you if they know that you understand. And so for parents, we must link heads with other parents who have gone ahead of us, who understand certain pathways that we have not yet touched, where we can learn the lesson. I document everything. I have folders upon folders. When I go to a meeting, I write an email. So this is what I walk away with, correct it, because then they can't come back to say, no, they never decided. And so there are certain practices that you have that know, and then people get to know you that you're this way. So they kind of
very professional.
Yeah. So they kind of go, oh, you can't play with Nathan's parents. And the time when I knew that Nathan, we had just moved to the United States. And after the first year, I think everybody got to know who I was. And again, there was no aggression. As I said, there was assertion in terms of how I went about it. And I remember I went to drop off Nathan, and the school system has a security post. It's a enclosed building. And so the security is on the other side of the building, and you have to get there, say who you are, and then she contacts whoever. And I walks in and she went to me and said, Nathan's mother is here. And this is a school with 1,700 students. Nathan's mother is here. So, they knew who I was.
What I like from your story is that you you switch to solution oriented and you use a keyword. You didn't say I or you said we.
We.
So it seems as if we're a team. We're doing this together, and it's not just you as a doctor needing to find a solution and I am the mom trying to get that solution from you. So it's to remember, parents, speak in terms of we. What is the possible solution that we can find?
Yes.
Right? Everybody's
you and me. This I and you or you and me that divides.
Yes, but go with we.
It collaborates. It enrolls.
In one of our conversations, you mentioned regarding advocacy in when you go for appointments. So that's the last thing I want to touch on. Sometimes doctors and other professionals, they use the jargons. They might be very dismissive. As a parent, you don't feel confident to really speak up. What word of advice do you have for parents when they go to those different specialists so that they can feel empowered and knowledgeable and not feel talked down to?
That's such a great question. I remember the first time a doctor was talking to me and she was just rolling off these jargons. And I was there and I did not understand a word she said. And after I left and I went home, I had Robert ask me, so what did the doctor say? I couldn't explain it. And I felt worthless as a mother. How can I have a child and not understand anything that the doctor has just said? So I made it again about me. And eventually I learned that when I'm talking to any professional, I always have my notebook. And I would ask, can you say that for me again? Can you tell me what that means? I don't understand. And they break it down. And then I say, okay, so what is my role? What am I supposed to do with that? And I kind of break it down into what I say, break it down into English. I break it down, have them break it down in a way that I understand. But importantly, even if you don't do that, you can actually write it down. And again, with so much information available on Google, you go home and you search it yourself. And then the next time you go back, you say to them, I noticed you said this and so and so and so on, but I don't understand the application for what it is. Can you explain more? And I find that when they become accustomed to you asking, they will come more prepared the next time they're having that conversation with you. And they will come more prepared in giving you additional information that you need in order to done what you're doing. And so again, it is about the confidence as a parent. And it goes back to the fact that it's a team and the parent holds equal space around the table that everybody, any other professional that is there. So nobody's opinion is more than yours. And of course, yours is not more than anybody else. But it is to recognize that we hold the key because we carry the inner details on our child that these professionals need in order to individualize their recommendation so it works for our parents. And so when we're dealing with advocacy, when we're dealing with a healthcare, it is about documenting the conversation we're having. It is about asking them, can you send me some more information on that? Or can I get it in writing? It is about doing your research and then what question comes up for you, because even after you've done your research, if you're not sure still what to do with that information, then you're going to ask. I go to doctors where there is a my chart. And so I'm able to go in digitally, electronically, online to pull down reports to look at what is happening. And I put it through Chat GPT. And I said, this lab result just came back. What does this mean?
Right.
And so it breaks it down for me. And I say, is there something I need to be concerned about? I'm going back to see the doctor. What are some questions I should ask? And so I go in with my list. And I open up and I say, okay, I have a few questions here. And I go through them and I write down information and so on. So that is what I really encourage parents to do. And again, I have made available through my YouTube channel, the Special Needs Mama Bear, through the Facebook channel, the Special Needs Mama Bear. There's a lot of free resource that I put there, but it's also a space where parents can actually come. They can ask their questions, because I have found the wisdom of other parents has surpassed all the professional help I've ever gotten. When Nathan was struggling with constipation, which is a secondary condition to cerebral palsy, they're telling me they're going to have to do a procedure to put a stoma at his side because of the constipation issue. And I said, no, he's having too many issues for that to be one of them, because Nathan picks at anything that is on him. So that would be a really dangerous thing for all of us for that to be the case. And I spoke before when we had traveled to Sunrise to Florida for that evaluation. He was hospitalized for constipation. And when we came back from the hospital, we were staying at the Ronald McDonald House. And so we had 100 and something other special needs families from around the world who traveled to that location to get care for their children.
That's a wealth of information.
Oh, I love that. I love those kitchen conversations. So when I got in, the evening they were having dinner and several parents said, oh, your son was over the hospital. What was the matter? And I said, constipation. And they began to give me a list of what they tried. And I wrote them down and I tried until I found one that worked for my son. And so I shared it with other parents. So a lot of very practical information that save you a world of trouble working through medications before you get to where you needed to be. A lot of very natural advice, giving them prune juice, pureeing the prune and giving it to them. There is a particular solution that is dissolvable because Nathan has a thing with taste. If it is off a bit, he picks it up and he doesn't want to drink it. So you can mix this solution in his juice and stuff like that softens his stool. So a lot of parents, I advise them, get into community of other parents and never be afraid. Social media, you can ask as anonymous if you don't want anybody to know. When Nathan turned 17, I put on one of the groups that I'm in on social media, and I said, my son is 17. What are the things I need to be considering for him between now and 21? And people gave me I actually did a binder that helped me to transition him to adult life. Because if I didn't do that, then I'd be stuck like a lot of families where you don't know that you need to do this until you at that age, but you needed to have started 3 years before. So your child is now 3 years behind. Your child now has to wait for that 3 years for you to do those other steps to catch up. When if you had known when they were 17, then you could have started. So by the time he was 20, everything was in place for him to transition out of high school straight into a day program. People told me it's going to take you years before he goes to a day program. That was never our experience. So I say to parents, you must ask the question, because the other point that I want to make in advocacy is that when we are going through the process with our child, we're only thinking of what is before us right now. So I'm not thinking next year when he's 17 if anything has changed. I'm not thinking when he's 20 if anything has changed. And then when he gets there, that's when I'm thinking about it. But in the United States, once they turn 18, there is something called guardianship. It's a process that takes about 6 months. Some people have done it on their own. It can take up to 2 years. And you have to go through the courts and that kind of process. So I didn't know how that would work. So we used a lawyer, but I had another parent who is a friend of my sister, whose son is cerebral palsy. And when we moved to the United States, she said to me, "How old is Nathan?" And I said, "He just turned 16. She said, "When he turns 17, you need to go to this website, you need to pull down, begin to read upon this, because you need to start the process for guardianship then." And so we did that. And when he turned 18 in May, and in September, we had his guardianship. There are so many other people, they're children in their 20s, in their 30s, and they don't have guardianship. And what that means is the states see him as an adult. And so we can no longer, with the Information Privacy Act, we can no longer make decision for him. We can't ask for his record. We can't do anything for him. They would have to assign an advocate for him to do that, which becomes very complex if you want to get things done. And so we just went in, myself, Robert, and Adrian, the advice, put one of the siblings on. And so we are guardians. And so we get to make all the decisions for him in that regard with ease. So I wouldn't have known that if another parent never said it to me. So I'm now telling other parents, once they tell me their child is 15, 16, I'm like, what's the process with guardianship? You need to get that started. And here is where you can go. And so being in a company of other parents and just asking, my child is 10, anything I need to be thinking about right now? We'll have other parents just sending information that will save you a world of trouble.
Yeah, so you have to find your tribe.
You have to find your tribe.
Yeah, don't isolate, even though it's challenging that you're going through this and you're overwhelmed with the day-to-day task of taking care of your child. You still have to find that tribe that will help to reduce some of the stress, because you starting to research from scratch is way more overwhelming compared to a parent saying, these are the steps, this is a contact number for X, Y, and Z. So you can just get that quickly out of the way.
Yes.
All right. To wrap up our call or talk, I want to ask you the tips or advice you would give to parents who are listening, who are in similar situation as you, how to maintain that connection with other siblings, how to take care of yourself, and how to maintain that connection with your spouse, despite the stress and challenges of caring for one of the children who has a disability.
Yes. So you have to ground yourself as a parent, whether it's a father that has more of that inkling or the mother that has. You have to ground yourself. I use my calendar. I schedule time. We had to schedule a day, 1 day a month for each child to spend with mom and dad. We scheduled things like, because we have 3 girls, 3 boys in our family, myself and 2 daughters, and Robert and 2 sons. And so we had the boys spend time with mom and dad separately, and the girls spend time with mom and dad separately. So all of those were scheduled in my calendar, because if you don't put it in, it never gets done. You schedule time with your spouse. You sit down and you decide ahead of time, we're going to do, once a month. You might not be able to do more than once a month initially, but that's a start. you schedule time for yourself. So I have myself in my calendar, and the children after a while knows that this is mommy's time. And, after a while, they begin to pick up on the pattern when I get into that point where I need a minute to myself. And even with our special needs children, I need to really emphasize that one because we feel so guilty and we always want to be there, especially if they're nonverbal and they're non-ambulatory, which means they can't help themselves, they can't walk, they can't feed themselves. So you feel fully responsible for them. And as a result, you teach them that you're indispensable because you don't take a break. So I had to learn to Nathan, and I would say to him, I need a minute. I need a minute. And I had to teach him, I need a minute. So I know he's just fed. I know that he's dry. And he just wants me to whether come change this program that he's watching, or he wants just for somebody to be there with him and I'm doing something else. I said, I need a minute. And I take a minute, or mommy is having this cup of tea, and then I'll come and see you. But make sure that you go and see them, after you're done. So I begin to train him that mommy needs time too. And I found that to be extremely helpful in helping me to secure time and helping the siblings to know that they are not less important than him. And also making sure that we do things together. So we go on car rides together. When we had no money to do anything, we go to the park and have picnic together. We go to what we call, when we're living in Jamaica, Rivers of Jamaica. And so we went we cook and pack food and we just drive for the day and find a river, which was free. And those are the memories that they remember today. We had movie nights in our bedroom. We used a projector and projected on the wall. And we bought the snacks and everybody get to be on mommy and daddy's bed. We spread out a big comforter so we don't have to worry about cleaning up a mess. And we had movie nights. So it is about creating memories. And that's when I began to realize that we can thrive as a family. That's when we realize that the disability isn't the end of our lives. It changed what our lives look like, but it creates an opportunity for us to build a life that we want, where our child is happy, we're happy, and we're supported, and the family. And so a big focus of my conversation for 2026 is to help parents understand that they can thrive. The last point that I want to touch on is finances. I had absolutely ignored finances for a long time because there was just too many other things that I was considering.
You were in
and Robert, yes, and Robert being the finance one would say, but we can't afford, but this is it. And I was like, I don't want to hear it because I was just kind of dealing with what was no. But I find that the finances is important. And so, because if you don't have the finances to lean back on, then you're going to have a problem with the things that you need to get done, and it makes life more miserable. And so I'm finding that there are things that are available to us. There are small savings that you can do. There is life insurance that you can take out with your company. A lot of companies tend to have that waiver and that option, especially here in the United States, where there is a life insurance that if you decide, they give you a minimum amount, but you can up it up to 11% of your salary. And it can move your insurance from $20,000 to $400,000. If anything happens to you, that money is there for your family and for your child. So I began to realize there are things that you can do from home. So I am a substitute teacher, so I can teach when I have availability and not teach when I don't. So I'm building income that way. There are online businesses that I do. I have a shop, Special Needs Mama Bear, that sell Mama Bear gears. And so I create these other avenues that allows me to work from home and still contribute to the income. And so we're able to do more. We're able to do things together, and we don't have certain kinds of pressure that we have when we don't have all of that. And so all of those combined are just some of the ways that we can ensure that every member of the family is looked after, that we feel contributing, because it bothers us when we're not contributing financially, that we feel that we're contributing to our lives and to our families, and we're also putting in safety nets for should anything happen to us and we can't work later on, or, should God forbid we pass on, to make sure that our family and our child is looked after. But again, we go back, unless you are sitting with somebody who is mentoring you through all of this, you don't know.
Challenge. Yeah.
And to try to take it on your own is overwhelming. But if you're working with people like us at the Special Needs Mama Bear community, then you take on the piece that you want, and you know that we're always here. And then you come back when you're ready to move on to the other place. And that support makes a world of difference for us.
One of the things I thought about as you mentioned the finances and, the different ventures you have online is that we live in a time now where mothers or fathers, whoever decides to stay at home, they can become virtual assistant. There's so many freelance websites,
Yeah.
Fiverr, for example, that they can still utilize their skill set. And I think that
Yeah.
also is tied into not losing your identity. Because if
Yes.
all that you're doing is caring for your child, then, you get to a point like, who am I?
Yeah. And why bother? And I don't want to be here anymore. There's no joy in life.
So the
And so, yeah.
finances meant also helps to get you out of the mode of constantly parenting to say, what can I do to still maintain my sense of self, with maintain my skill set as well, until I can
Mhm.
get to a point where I can work more full time or more hours and so on. Yeah.
And meet adults to have adult conversation and to
Right.
think
Not
about things that's not about caregiving.
exactly.
So yeah, so it helps to make sure that you're dealing with yourself holistically. And so one of the services that I do offer is parent coaching, where there is a community and it's accessed through our store. There's a membership site. So there's one of them is a free membership site, and it's the Special Needs Mama Bear store. And there's a free membership site where people can actually just go and get templates and information and all of that. And then there's a paid membership site where you get more than that. You get to meet with me once a month as a group. You get to, if you're going to an appointment and you're lacking in confidence and you need some guidance, you can send that information to us. I have a team of speech therapists and physical therapists and other people who can help you interpret something and provide you with a list of questions that you can ask to just kind of help you get started. If we're doing a financial, Special Needs Mama Bear financial readiness workshop in March of this year, is going to be virtual as well, hybrid, in person and virtual, where I'm working with a financial wealth advisor, because I'm now putting that part into my life together, who said to me, as a woman, you need to have some financial security beyond your husband. And as a woman, you need to also put provision, because if anything happens to you, it is not just the income that goes, it's all of the wisdom and the knowledge that you carry in the caregiving role that goes as well. How does your family manage with your child if anything should happen to you? So she is working with us to put that plan, that financial plan, long-term plan in place. So whatever I'm learning, I'm offering that back to other families so that we can get to a place where we answer one of the top questions that I see parents ask every day. What happens to me? What happens to my child when I'm gone?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so instead of wondering, we help you work it through, where it doesn't matter if you have a lot of income or no income, there is always a pathway and learning. And so I'm just working to share all of these with other families so that they can build a life of thriving that they're happy with.
Yes. Thank you so much, Christine. That was a wealth of information for parents who are
Mhm.
in the same situation as you, trying to raise a special needs child, also have other siblings to take care of, and also extended family members and friends who are listening to say, okay, this is what it's all about. This is some of the challenges that my friend might be experiencing. They may not have said anything to me, but I have an idea, and possibly this is how I can support them. So, Special Needs
Mhm.
Mama Bear, that is your handle for all your social media and your
For social media and YouTube channel,
so
yes.
parents can definitely reach out, not just
Mhm.
parents, but grandparents, aunts, uncles who
Allies, yes, because I have teachers who say, "Oh, I need you to come do some talks with parents in my class." I have a group of therapists that say, "We have you on our list because we're going to be talking to parents." There's a power when parents talk to parents than when a professional talk to parents. And so, just anybody, I've had people who buy my books, like Raising Nathan Against All Odds, Discovering the Blessings, Joy and Purpose in Raising a Child with Disabilities. It won an award last year, a major award, book award, for bringing the conversation of disability into mainstream. And I've had parents who come up and say, "Hey, I need to buy a copy of your book because there's somebody whose child was just diagnosed, and I'd like to gift them with a copy with that." So they're just different ways that they can support. I make sure a lot of times that in everything that I'm doing, that Nathan teachers always know about it. They always get the training. My children's book, I'm Just Like You But Different, a story about living a cerebral palsy, is about friendship and belonging. Real story about Nathan, kindergarten years, and people just buy them, put them in their library, put them in their classrooms as a way of helping our children with disabilities to see themselves in the print, but also to help to bring in more diversity into the children's libraries, teaching them about disabilities. So there are a lot of ways that, that people can support other families and other communities that are serving children and adults with disabilities.
Yeah. Wealth of information exists out there, parents. So even though it's overwhelming and you're in a fight flight mode or survival mode, don't isolate yourself. Reach out, find your tribe. You can start with Christine. Look at the Special Needs Mama Bear program that she has on her website, on YouTube, on Instagram, on Facebook. She's easy to find so that you're not there struggling by yourself. You can also find your community who can support you with all the bureaucracy and logistics to vent, just to support and tips for parenting and being with your spouse and all of that. So don't isolate yourself, find your tribe. Thank you so much, Christine, for joining us today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.